Hello and welcome to the Spring Sky Diary. We're already in March and meteorologically speaking, we've entered spring. But astronomically speaking, we don't actually start spring until the 20th of March. To be precise, at 09:37 on the 20th of March. This is when the spring equinox is going to occur. So what do we mean by the equinox? Well, the length of the day is roughly similar to the length of the night. So we have 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of night. Not exactly 12 hours because of the way we define sunrise and sunset and because of something called atmospheric refraction. Atmospheric refraction, simply put a straw in a glass of water. Can you see that it's bent? That's because of the light changing speed a little bit when it goes from air into water and it changes the direction of light. This occurs in the atmosphere around the Earth as well. So at sunset, when you're watching the sun setting over the horizon, the sun's already gone. At sunrise, when you've seen the sun appear over the horizon, it's not actually risen yet. It's a bit of a strange thing. But this gives us the slight differences in day length and the length of the night. So not exactly 12:12, but near enough. The equinox occurs twice a year, one in the spring and one in the autumn, and it's all to do with Earth's orbit around the sun. So Earth is tilted. So in the summertime, the tilt is facing towards the sun. In the wintertime, the tilt is away from the sun. But in the spring and the autumn, the sun's rays hit both the northern and the southern hemisphere in equal quantities. So this is where you get the equal day length and night length. It is when the sun crosses the celestial equator. The celestial equator, basically, think about the equator and just extend that imaginary line out into space onto that starry field at night. That's your celestial equator. So that is when the sun is passing for the northern hemisphere and the spring is passing from the south to the north. And what does it mean? It means the days are going to get longer and we're looking forward to spring and moving into the summer. So what have we got to look forward to in these spring months coming up? So let's think about the full moons. The full moon is the 28th of March, so that's the first full moon of astronomical spring. And that is the worm moon by the Native Americans. And then in April, it's on the 27th of April, and that is the pink moon, and it's all to do with in America, in North America, when the phlox comes out, this beautiful flower called phlox, and it's pink. Now, there's a little bit of something different about the April moon, full moon, and that is because it's a supermoon. And we don't just have one in the spring, we have two, because on the following month, on the 26th of May, we also have another supermoon, the flower moon. So why do we call it a supermoon? It's not actually an official term, but it is because of the way that the moon and the actual shape of the orbit of the moon around the Earth. It's not completely circular. It's an oval shape, slightly oval. So sometimes the moon is closer to Earth than at the other times. Now, if the full moon coincides with this closer approach, it's called perigee. If the full moon occurs at that, or new moon, you can get what is called a supermoon. Now, with the full moon, obviously you see it. With the new moon, you don't. But with the supermoon, you see it coming up over the horizon and it looks a little bit bigger. It's an optical illusion, really, because the moon isn't bigger. It's just slightly closer, so it might look a little bit bigger. And then, of course, you've got all the things to compare it with around in the area that you're looking. So what about the planets in spring? Well, we're hanging on to Mars still. It's getting fainter and fainter as it moves around in its orbit around the Sun. So let's have a look where it is at the moment. We talked about before about reaching the highest point in the sky. Well, Mars is reaching directly due south when it's still light. So we can't really go on that anymore. So we have to look towards the west for Mars now. Setting still after midnight through March, April and May, but getting fainter. At the moment, it is in Taurus in March, in the constellation of Taurus. We talked about Orion, the hunter. Look for Taurus by following the belt of Orion upwards towards the star Aldebaran. That is Taurus. And Mars is in the horns of the bull during March. In April, it's moving now through the zodiacal constellations, and we're moving through into the feet of Gemini. And then through May, it moves again through Gemini, and it's coming up to the armpit of the left-hand twin. By June, it's moving into the constellation of Cancer and getting fainter and fainter and heading towards the western horizon, and it will soon be lost after June. Another planet that you might want to look out for is Mercury. This is, however, extremely elusive, and you'll have to be pretty quick. May the 10th to about the 24th, very, very low on the western horizon. If you've got a very clear horizon and a very clear night, you may be able to see Mercury just after the sunset. But again, it is quite elusive. Now, with Mercury, we've also got Venus, and Venus is going to be lost in twilight. You may be able to see it through the end of May, coming up through into June, but by June, we're going to be looking out for Venus. In a previous video, I mentioned the constellation of Leo the Lion. It's a great constellation for spring. And I mentioned about how to find it from the Pan in Ursa Major, the asterism of the plough. Now, Leo, as I said, spring is a much better time to see Leo, and at 10 o'clock in March, it is by mid-March, it's directly due south at 10 o'clock. In April, directly due south at 8 o'clock, and in mid-May, directly due south at 6 o'clock. So it is really a lot easier to find. So look for that backward way question mark, and then find that first, and then you will see the body of the lion appearing. Now at the very bottom of the backwards way question mark is the beautiful star Regulus, and that is the one that you can see. It's almost like the dot at the bottom of the question mark. Another constellation to look out for in the spring is the constellation of Hercules. Hercules, the strong man. Now, it's not as prominent as other constellations, but it's a good one to spot. You're really learning how to spot your constellations if you can find Hercules, and it's also got a hidden gem inside it. What you're looking for is the shape of the keystone. That's the body of Hercules. Don't worry about his arms and legs. In mythology, he's upside down, brandishing a club. So, what you're looking for is the star Arcturus in the constellation of Boötes, which is underneath. And you find that beautiful star Arcturus that we've mentioned in a previous video. You draw an imaginary line up, and you should come to the constellation of Hercules. And you're looking at that keystone. So there's a picture of Hercules and how to find Hercules here. So when are you going to start spotting it? Well, we've got to think about April now, because it's going to start appearing over the eastern horizon as the sun is setting by mid-April. And as we go through April, May and June, of course, it will rise earlier and earlier and higher in the sky. So a lot easier to spot as we're going through towards the end of spring and into the summer. And what's that hidden gem? It's one of my favourite objects in the night sky. It's called M13, M for Messier. M13 is a beautiful globular cluster, a whole bunch of thousands and thousands and thousands of stars held together by gravity. You can't see it with the unaided eye, but you can see it if you have a steady pair of binoculars. And I've put a picture of it here and where to locate it. It is, as I say, a fabulous thing to look at, this glowing ball of stars. It's even better in a telescope if you manage to get to see and have a look at it through a telescope. But it is the hidden gem in the constellation of Hercules. Coming up at a similar time to Hercules in mid-April is a constellation that you wouldn't necessarily look for. And it's a constellation called Serpens. And it's Serpens Caput. And Serpens Caput means the head of the serpent. And if you look to just slightly to the right of Hercules, the bottom of the constellation of Hercules, you will see the constellation of Serpens Caput rising in mid-April. Now, I've mentioned Serpens Caput because as we go through April and May and into June, right behind Serpens Caput is a constellation called Ophiuchus. Now, Ophiuchus is depicted as this man wrapped around with a serpent, the serpent bearer. Right behind Ophiuchus as it's coming up is the tail of the serpent, Serpens Cauda. So why have I mentioned this constellation of Ophiuchus and Serpens Caput and Serpens Cauda? So there's three constellations together and they're linked, as I said. The mythology is this man wrapped around with a serpent. And you may have seen in veterinary surgeries and also the logo of the World Health Organization. We've heard an awful lot about the World Health Organization just recently, haven't we? It's the rod of Asclepius. So you've got a rod with a serpent wrapped around it. And the mythology of Ophiuchus is where that comes from, where the rod of Asclepius comes from. And the mythology really is the fact that Ophiuchus took herbs that he saw a snake using to bring back another snake that had died. And he used those herbs, and he used the herbs on the living and the dead. And it was the first time really that there was a healer, so it was all to do with healing. It didn't end well for Ophiuchus, unfortunately, but that mythology stories never do end well. But because of his skill in these medicinal herbs, he was placed in the heavens in mythology. On the other side of Hercules, from Serpens Caput, rising at about the same time at the bottom, is a beautiful star called Vega. Vega is the fifth brightest star in our northern skies, beautiful star in the constellation of Lyra. Now, even though this is rising in the spring, it's heralding and the promise of summer. If we start going through into mid-May, the next star in what we call the summer triangle appears. This is Deneb in the constellation of Cygnus the Swan. So that is appearing over the eastern horizon as the sun is setting in the west. Now going right through to June, mid-June, you get the third and final star of the summer constellation appearing, and that is the star Altair in the constellation of Aquila. So there we have the summer triangle all there by mid to late June, coming up above the horizon in the hours of darkness. And we'll talk about the summer triangle in the next one. So I hope you can join me again as we talk about the summer constellations and the sky diary for the summer.